Were we okay to start? Yep. Yeah, I got that right here. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us. Before we start, I want to mention that Council Vice President Tom Hucker, who could not be here today because he's in Annapolis, testifying in support of legislation requiring the state to get consent from county governments to build toll roads in that county's jurisdiction. So he's not here on this committee today, but he's certainly doing the county's business. I think it should be noted that Councilmember Albanese and I are on the Public Safety Committee, but we also welcome our good friend and colleague, Councilmember Craig Rice, who is here with us, who was one of the people that sponsored this legislation, the first bill's legislation. We have three this afternoon. The first is community policing, and then we're going to be following that for about to discuss the capital improvements program, the first for police and the second for corrections and rehabilitation. And with that, we're going to begin for the first one, which is the community policing legislation. And Ms. Frog, or Ms. Myhill, one of you, please lead us through. Go ahead if you want. I can't hear you. Oh, and it should be noted that we are not voting on this today. This is just strictly a work session. Okay, please. Did you want to start, Craig? Thanks.
Thank you very much, and it's perfect timing as my lead sponsor, Councilmember Navarro, is coming in. Let me say that this has been an interesting turn of events. And I say that because as a person born and raised here in Montgomery County, who grew up in a time in which Montgomery County was in all ways a place that had police that had good relationships with its communities that were black and brown. I've seen this county come a long way. I remember driving home from Herman's Sporting Goods one evening, driving my mother's car and being pulled over by the police. And the officer had asked me where I was going, what I was doing, why I had a pager, and continued to kind of inquire, to which I had asked him, well, why did you stop me to begin with? Because I wasn't speeding, I wasn't doing anything. And he said, well, you fit the description. And a lot of us in this community who are black, who are brown, know what that means. That's where we used to be. And the reality is that we're not there any longer. And I'm happy to say that. I'm happy to say that as a resident, as a father of 3 children. We're not at that same place. And it says a lot. It says a lot about us as a community. It says a lot about us as county government. It says a lot about us as a police force, that we've evolved. Does it mean that we're perfect? Absolutely not. Does it mean that we don't have bad actors? Absolutely not. Does it mean that we still have more work to do? Certainly it does. And I think that this bill was put forth to make sure that we continued in that same spirit, to make our relationships between the police and our community better, to make sure that folks understand that the police are not our enemy, but they're there to protect and serve us. That's what we pay them to do. So for anyone who thinks that I am going to use my tax dollars as an individual, as a resident who was born and raised here, to not have someone who is there to protect and serve myself and my family is sadly mistaken. That's what our responsibility is. And so to simply throw up our hands and say, oh, the police aren't for us, the police are against us, is crazy talk, in my opinion. What makes sense is for us to make sure that we have a system that works for all of us, that protects us all, and ensures that we have fair and equitable treatment, and that gives us the protections that we're due and afforded by the laws of this county and by this state and by this nation. That's what we should be insisting and asking for. That's what this bill seeks to do. So, to get colloquial for a minute, I don't want people to get it twisted in terms of somebody thinking that they're going to tell me what my intentions are. Let me be very clear. As a young black man who grew up in this county, who's had not so always positive interactions with police officers. I get it and understand why people have angst and concern. But the reality is, if we don't fix this and pretend as though the system is something that can't be retooled to make sure that it works for us, we've given up on a whole bunch beyond just a system that is there to protect and serve. We've given up on us as a societal structure. We have to and owe it to ourselves to roll up our sleeves and make the really difficult work and have the difficult conversations about what it means to have a police department that's responsive, a police department that's supportive, that's respectful. And I think that we can get there for everyone. The reality is it's already there for some, but we can make sure that it's there for everyone. I really want to thank Councilmember Navarro, because both of us, now we're joined by Councilmember Albornoz and by Councilmember Jawando, but the reality is that we, back when it was Valerie Irvin, we were the ones who were holding down the fort in terms of the voices of people of color. I ran for this to make sure that voices of people like me were heard. And so I want people to understand and think about that, because my responsibility is much larger than a slogan. My responsibility is something I've lived all my life. I know that regardless of whether I hold the title of council member or not, I walk into a place and people see a black guy. That's what they see. I've experienced racism throughout my life, and I know that that won't stop tomorrow. Those things will still continue. We see a federal entity that continues to try and divide us all and continue to put race as a forefront of separation. These are the kinds of things that I hope that in my children's lifetime may be minimized. But the reality is they still exist. The reason why I say that is because nobody's going to tell me what racial justice is. Nobody's going to tell me what racism is. Nobody's going to tell me what equity should be. I know it. I live it each and every day. And so that's the reason why I feel as though this bill is the right direction for us to go in, because I know, speaking for me as a black man, and the experiences that I've had, what I need to focus on to make sure that our police department is one of the best in the nation, that is respectful for everyone, and that gets the job done in protecting and serving everybody who deserves it, which is everybody in our community. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank the members of the Public Safety Committee for this work session. These mics are all over the place. So first, let me say that, all throughout last year, during my presidency, one of the tasks at hand was for me to shepherd the appointments of different department heads and agency heads for the new administration. And of course, one of the most important ones was the chief of police. And during that process, there were many community conversations that were held in forums, and there was a lot of just interest and a lot of energy around the selection of the chief of police, and also looking at what it is that the county wanted in terms of the ingredients of this new way of what our police department could do, just building on the, I think, major progress that had been made, but also trying to identify those areas where there could be improvement. And one of the things that I found most interesting was that, again, this is a parallel conversation, we are having this in many different settings, is that the Montgomery County of today is just so different from the Montgomery County of 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so there are a lot of different communities, and there are a lot of opportunities and challenges that we face. And I remember saying that I was really paying close attention to make sure that whoever was going to take the mantle of this police department had to be somebody that understood the complexity of our county vis-a-vis who we are. And so there's no doubt there's going to be different opinions and different ways of doing things. But I do remember the concept of community policing coming up a lot during a lot of these conversations, and community policing may mean a different thing to different people. I remember being surprised by attending certain parent nights in my district in Title I schools, where I would find members of our police department, the leadership of the 3rd District Police Station or the 4th District, interacting with Latino parents, with immigrant parents, having genuine conversations. And then I would talk to some of these parents, and they would share with me how important it was to know that these were police officers that were familiar faces. They would talk to me about issues that they were facing in their own blocks, in the parks, things of that nature. And so I remember just really being struck by that there was this real interest in being out there and establishing these very important connections. And of course, we always talk about the fact that we need to develop that trust, because especially in the immigrant community today, that is key. It's key for public safety, that people feel comfortable collaborating, et cetera. But then, in conversations with certain police officers and the union, et cetera, and other points, I would also hear that, we supposedly are doing community policing, but we really aren't. And there seemed to be this discrepancy. And so that was my impetus for saying, okay, well, we have this opportunity with a new administration, a change in the council, to look at frameworks and structural changes. And maybe it's time to have a piece of legislation that really enshrines the concept, the framework of community policing, as something that is integral to our Montgomery County Police Department way of life. Not to be hyper-prescriptive in the legislation, because that's not what we do as legislators, but to set forth a framework that then the executive, as the person who is in charge of the police department, can work with the community and with the police department to find what would be those kinds of specific initiatives, what through regulation can then be implemented to bring to life this, hopefully, consensus understanding of what community policing is. So that was my interest in this. That was the impetus for this. I think I was just in a role last year trying to put in place as many things that I could in terms of frameworks and establishing things in law, because I find it problematic when we are talking, but we're not on the same page about something as important as this. So I really appreciate everybody that has chimed in. This has been, I think, an important process. I think we gathered a lot of feedback during those community conversations last year. There have been organizations that have come to meet with me, that have shared their concerns. We have collaborated with the police department, with the FOP. I mean, everybody has had an opinion. And Councilmember Rice, who is the co-lead, also had things that he felt was important to include. But after much deliberation and listening to the feedback, I have put forth some amendments that have been as a direct result of that feedback. And I hope that the committee will deliberate on those and adopt them. And I really do look forward to this being actually a positive thing that we can, be proud of, and that we can feel good about, actually, because there's just a lot of, I think, misunderstanding still out there, and I hope that this will begin to calm things down. So I just really thank you for the indulgence, and I look forward to the committee discussing the amendments and hopefully adopting them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for the opportunity to make some opening comments as we have this very important discussion. And this has been, in my opinion, a very helpful and informative process. And I really want to thank Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Rice for moving this forward. For background and context, I've lived in Montgomery County my whole life, all 43 years. I've lived in Gaithersburg, Silver Spring, Bethesda, and now Kensington. And as the former director of the Recreation Department, who managed 39 recreation facilities pretty evenly spread out through this entire community, I have traveled just about every corner of this county many, many, many times. And I can tell you community policing means different things to different people. But what is unquestionably true and unquestionably important is the strong relationship and trust between our community and law enforcement, which helps raise all boats. And so I commend the effort to try and ensure that through future police chiefs, through future administrations, we lay down the marker in a formal way, acknowledging the importance of community policing and doing our best within reason to help define it, so that we're all speaking, at least trying to speak from the same perspective and from similar angles, so that we can work towards ensuring that trust for generations to come. So I look forward to this discussion and deliberation, and I appreciate the amendments that my colleague has put forward, and I look forward to this robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was going to start with the packet and then have discussion, but obviously others would like to do it this way. I first of all want to thank Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Rice for sponsoring the legislation. I think everybody's a co-sponsor on it. It's been mentioned a couple times here today that Gabe grew up in Montgomery County, Craig grew up in Montgomery County, I grew up in Montgomery County. When I was in first grade is when the school's integrated. My colleagues have heard me say it more times than they ever want to hear. But I did. I went to integrated schools, but it was during my lifetime that happened in Montgomery County. I remember vividly, and I was in Gaithersburg, and Gaithersburg was a small town. We had a store. We knew everybody. Everybody knew us. And the schools were integrated, but Montgomery County wasn't integrated. You couldn't go to the movies together. It was still segregated. We have come a long way in Montgomery County. We shouldn't have ever been in that spot, but we were. I mean, we can't change history. We can change for the future. And that's what this is all about. This is about trust and transparency and a good open dialogue. For years, people who were friendly, regardless of your race, people who were friendly didn't have the conversations because it was unpleasant. You just didn't have unpleasant conversations. We do now, and we need to. So I think that this is this going to be the one piece of legislation that changes everything on the whole world? It won't be. But I think that this will be a right step in the right direction, and that we can build upon this to get something much more accomplished. Please, if one of you ladies would like to lead us through the packet.
Sure.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I just say for the record,
Sure.
I did not grow up in Montgomery County, but now I've lived more than half of my life in Montgomery County. Okay. Just for the record.
Well, might I add, you're certainly very welcome here. All right.
So I'm going to walk through the packet, but I know that you will interrupt me if you want me to stop it.
Yeah, please, This is not a shy group up here. It's
No.
not.
I'm going to turn your attention to page 2. I just want to give a brief overview of what Bill 3319, the Community Policing Bill, does. There are essentially 3 components to the bill. The first component, if you will, is the legislative findings, which are on lines 3 through 28, and they provide background information from both the Department of Justice as well as the Police Executive Research Forum on the importance of community policing. The second component is the community policing guidelines. The guidelines that are required by the bill are specified on page 3, and they require the police department to regularly initiate and engage in positive non-enforcement activities with communities, to ensure cultural competency throughout the department, to emphasize the recruitment of candidates with ties to the county, increase community outreach initiatives, and will require officers to attend community events on behalf of the department, to provide adequate training in de-escalation tactics, and maintain and expand the school resource officer program. There are also several reporting requirements in the bill, and that's the third component of this bill. The bill requires the police department to provide the executive and the council with an annual report containing several pieces of information. I won't read all of them. They're on lines 44 through 73, but essentially the reporting requirements relate to demographics of the police force, use of force statistics, officer suspension information, youth referred to intervention programs, and community policing efforts. The council did have a very robust public hearing on this bill, and starting at the bottom of page 2, I've summarized the suggested amendments from the hearing and and correspondence that the council's received. And again, I did this by grouping of the components because I thought that was probably the easiest to follow. So related to the legislative findings, one individual requested an amendment to explicitly add language about racism and anti-racism. You'll see the council staff note there is that the bill language is introduced, summarized what this Police Executive Research Forum actually found, and so it's more appropriate to accurately summarize that. So I didn't recommend any amendments related to that. Starting on page 3, there are amendments that were suggested dealing with community policing guidelines. As you full well know, many individuals as well as organizations oppose the bill's requirement that the police department expand and maintain the school resource officer program. I've noted there that the amendment that we'll get to in a moment proposed by Ms. Navarro would address that issue. There was also an amendment recommended that a liaison officer or a unit be created at the police department to improve relationships between law enforcement and the LGBTQ community. Also, there was a recommended amendment to better define diversity and cultural competency, an amendment to better define the role of police in the community to limit, and I'm using a quotation here, the intimidation factor. You'll see the council staff note there is that for us it was very unclear what that meant. We're not sure what intimidation factor means, and it's not really an objective measurable criteria, so difficult to implement. Finally, on this component, there was a recommended amendment to create a crisis assistance helping out on the streets program or unit so that medical and mental health professionals trained in de-escalation and soft skill can be available to deal with mental health crisis. And as I noted here, the amendment that we'll talk about in a few minutes would also address that issue. Related to the reporting requirements, the NAACP urged an amendment to require the police department to report several pieces of data on the SRO program. There was also an amendment suggested to urge the de-escalation training standards and practices be adopted and publicly reported. A proposed amendment to require the police to report on all instances of use of force. Another requested amendment would require the police department to report on the total number of sworn police officers by race, ethnicity, sex, and other optional information. Also, a requested amendment to require the police department to report on civilian complaints about verbal offenses and bigotry. An amendment to specify the annual reports also be issued to the public. I did note for you that most annual reports are publicly available, and many of these amendments that requested additional reporting are actually done in a public annual report. But the language in the bill is appropriate that it specify that the report is made to the council and the executive. Finally, on circles 69 through 71, there was a resident who urged several additions to the reporting requirements, and I did not list them all here, but I did note for you that some of those that are requested weren't appropriate for inclusion in the bill. Some of them are addressed in the amendment, and I generally noted, of course, you can ask for whatever information that you would like, and in fact, for some of the requested information for Mr. Pastor, we actually did ask the police department to respond to some of those, and those responses are included in your packet. Starting on the middle of page 4, as Ms. Navarro noted, there is a proposed amendment that would address many of the issues that were raised in testimony. I'll just quickly walk through them, I'll just quickly walk through them.
Go ahead, please.
The first one would delete the requirement for the department to maintain and expand the school resource officer program. Second, the amendment would require the director to designate a liaison to each population that is disproportionately impacted by inequities. Turning to page 5, the third component of the amendment would better define cultural competency by requiring the department to ensure cultural competency throughout the department and increase officer knowledge of the county's diverse population. A fourth amendment would require the department to incorporate mental health and positive youth development initiatives in partnership with county departments, agencies, and community-based organizations. And related to reporting, one of the amendments would require the department to provide a description of the department's training practices and standards, including training and practices related to de-escalation. Also, the amendment related to use of force would, as requested in the hearing testimony, would require a reporting of the number of instances of use of force that resulted in any injury, not just a transportation to the hospital. The seventh component of the amendment would require the department to more broadly report on demographic makeup of the department, to include demographic information that's voluntarily provided by sworn police officers. Another reporting requirement would require the number of civilian complaints regarding discrimination and harassment to be reported. Also reporting the number of calls for service involving substance abuse and mental health issues. And the last part of the amendment would require demographic information about detainees to be reported by the police department.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. I really want to thank Ms. Manda Myhill for working through these amendments. Obviously, she did a really great job in compiling the feedback from the nights of public hearing, as well as whatever other correspondence we received. And so I think these amendments, again, while not being hyper prescriptive, because that's not what we do in legislation, what it does is that it attempts to provide some general framework guidelines that then the executive, through regulation, can look at what are going to be the specific ways in which this could be brought to life. I did want to also remind ourselves that the racial equity and social justice legislation, the police department falls under that legislation. So, it's not mentioned here explicitly because the police department is the department of the county government. So that's why it's not mentioned specifically. And also, I think amendment number 4 was a very interesting amendment because in conversations with Surge and Casa de Maryland and other organizations, this issue of mental health came up quite a bit, and also the positive youth development initiatives. And I thought that was a really awesome observation because we here always talk about the importance of mental health and positive youth development initiatives, et cetera, in collaboration with our police department and how integral that is to community policing. So that's why it's there. And it was something that was brought up that I thought was very useful to include in there. It's not for the police department now to become an HHS department. It's for us to be able to enshrine that we really do value the kind of collaboration with our HHS department, Department of Recreation, in terms of these types of very positive and preventative initiatives. And so that's why that one is there. So I just wanted to point those specifically, and then all the other ones I think are pretty straightforward. And again, working with our attorney here, I felt that this was language that passed the muster in terms of the way that we incorporate things into our pieces of legislation. And again, really appreciate all of Amanda's great work, and Ms. Farag as well, who is the guru of public safety, who also worked with Amanda as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will support these amendments, but I wanted to speak to the first one with regards to the school resource officers. So I understand and respect very much the concern that was articulated over adding uniformed police officers within our schools. I get that. I get that the national best practices are and the national data when it comes to that is challenging, to say the least. But I want to speak specifically to Montgomery County's school resource officer program, which I happen to know a lot about. So As I said before, I used to be the director of the rec department, and the rec department is responsible for the coordination of the majority of the after-school programs in the county that are not carried out by the school system. And so the ecosystem of support within a school is very important, the structure that's in place to support our students. And the school resource officers that we regularly interacted with through Montgomery County Recreation and the various schools that we worked with were not just beat officers taken off the street and assigned to a school. These were folks that had received an extensive amount of training and how to de-escalate situations. They had received training on advancing youth development to address the social and emotional needs of students. And I want to underline the resource aspect of school resource officers, because that, in my experience, was exactly what those officers were within the schools that we regularly interacted with every day. They would help de-escalate situations. They did provide another caring adult that students could turn to in incidents where they felt that they were being threatened by violence, in incidents where they felt that sex trafficking has been identified and reported to some of our school resource officers. And they also provided support for the administration as a whole. And so I just want to underscore that the SRO program is not just taking beat officers without any training and then placing them in a situation. It is different than that. And again, I can only speak in the first person about the experiences I had in the coordination of programs that really helped enrich and support and keep our kids safe, and acknowledge that that was an important part of that ecosystem. And I want to highlight in particular our street outreach network that is coordinated through the Health and Human Services Department. Luis Cardona and his team work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to help protect our children in Montgomery County. And if Luis were here, he would tell you that the school resource officers are integral to that entire unit being able to collectively support our children. And so I get and respect the concern, particularly from those that are not as familiar with the program, to make sure that we're aligned with best practices. But I just wanted to state that, that I support this amendment, but I very much understand the place from which we were coming from in trying to enrich a program that, in my opinion and through my personal experience, has been a positive thing.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Councilmember Albornoz, for teeing this off for me. I am going, and look, you know, I don't have a vote on the committee, but I support, but I support every single one of the amendments. And Councilmember Navarro and I have talked about this extensively, and she knows my passion about our school resource officer program. Let me just say that one of the biggest challenges for me is that folks continue to espouse things about our school resource officers that aren't true, and they don't have any data to back it up. Anyone who says that school resource officers lock up kids or they abuse kids don't have any data to support that, and I would challenge you to provide that to me. It's councilmember.rice@montgomerycountymd.gov, 240-777-7955. Please contact my office and let me know if you have evidence to support that. And if you don't, please stop saying it, because it's not helpful. It's not helpful to us in our community. It's not helpful when it comes to us being able to try and achieve a positive relationship between our students and people who are employed to protect and serve them. I keep using that because I think that people forget what sworn officers are asked to do. They are asked to lay down their lives for us. There are people's children who go to the academy. There are people's mothers and fathers and children who go to work every single day who may not come home that are laying down their lives for us. My cousin is a police officer in Prince George's and was one of the ones most recently who was reported who had been hit while serving a traffic stop from a fleeing victim. He's got 2 little girls at home. And when Brittany had gotten the phone call that AJ had been hit, her first question was, is he alive? I want people to understand that the majority of our officers are not thinking about locking anybody up or killing someone else. What they're thinking about is whether or not they're going to be able to go home to their families that night. I just want to keep it real because I think, again, we've lost sight when we start trying to go in these different directions of good sound bites that try and further a cause that isn't something that's unique here to Montgomery County. I've seen the videos and been troubled by the videos of officers who have mistreated children, just as I've been troubled by any video of any person that mistreats anybody in any sort of capacity of public service. Those things happen all the time, and they're bad actors. And we need to immediately, as soon as we find out who they are, get rid of them and ensure that they have no contact with our community. They need to be fully prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So that being said, why are people so fearful of these officers who are trying to help our kids? I encourage folks, there's a video that Montgomery County did called A Day in the Life of Joe Lowry, School Resource Officer. I encourage you to watch it. I encourage you to watch it because I want you to hear what students have to say. Instead of telling students what they should fear and what they should feel about school resource officers, ask them what they think. Ask them what they think about the officers. I've asked many people who are in the audience today to come with me to a school, to sit with a school resource officer, to see how the children interact. My phone has not rung yet. So I issue the challenge again. Come with me if you think that our school resource officers are so bad, and let's see what the students have to say, the real consumers of our school resource officer program. And then let's see if you will hold up the same signs and send the same notes to the council. So I agree with what the NAACP laid out. I think that it's going to be incredibly important, and so I've requested that we have a joint committee meeting between the Education and Culture Committee and the Public Safety Committee to analyze some of the data that the NAACP has asked for, including the number and type of incidents that required school resource officer intervention, as well as the disposition of those interactions, the number and type of incidents listed by school, the race, gender, and age of the students involved in the incidents, and the specific training curriculum for the SROs, as well as engaging in a discussion around the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding that currently exists between MCPS and MCPD. I think that once we do all of that, the information will be very clear. Our kids are best served by people who care about them, who are around them and protecting and serving them. That's what our school resource officers do. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. I, too, am going to support these amendments. And obviously, we're not voting today, but I think they all are well thought out. I do think it's all been said, and I'm certainly not going to repeat every word, but the school resource officers, I've been to their training, not the complete training, but I've been to much of their training. I know that they are trained. I know that they are people in the job that want to do that job. In many cases, the school resource officer is a counselor to a student. He's a friend to a student. He's a sponsor, or she's a sponsor for after-school clubs. Our school resource officers do a very good job. Is everybody perfect every day? Of course not. But they do a very good job. And as far as the mental health initiatives, Montgomery County can always do more. We are doing more. But I can tell you, we are on literally the cutting edge to have people be diverted from being arrested, to have people who can get their lives back on track through and it starts with a police officer in many cases, but they go through mental health courts and other places. Chief, I don't know if you have anything to add. Would you like to, and you and anybody from your team, if you would like to come forward, we're going to move on at some point here to the capital improvements program, but if you would like to add anything.
So good afternoon, Chief Marcus Jones, and just briefly, I don't want to hold up everyone's time because I think what I've heard thus far from the council has been well thought out and well said. I fully support these amendments and this bill. I will tell you again, as noted by one of the staffers, that the information, much as that's in this bill, much is already published and captured, there are some things that we are going to have to work at capturing data sets of information that's in the bill, and we're prepared and we'll work towards making that happen. And I don't have any bad feelings about that whatsoever. I will tell you, again, not to belabor the point, but I think what Councilman Rice said, which is, and what all of you said is true, but specifically when you talk about not only just the dedication of officers in this school resource officer program, which I uphold them to, because it takes someone special to go into particularly some of our larger high schools that are many cities in many ways, each and every school day when you have 2,000 plus students. And you have one officer who is there to be sort of the liaison and to address what issues, public safety issues that are there. They know they are not there to make arrests. That's not what they're primarily there for. They have to act when they have to act. There are special and identified in our policy and with the MOU with MCPS the specific crimes that we would physically make an arrest in that particular school in our best way of not disrupting the school day. And then there's other events that occur in the school that sometimes are victim type crimes. They are assaults, they are thefts, there's different things, vandalisms that might occur, and those are what we call paper arrests. They are sent to the Department of Juvenile Justice, and they are then screened to determine whether or not the student that was involved in that particular incident should actually be diverted to some type of program, or that person would go to actually go before the Department of Juvenile Justice in order to be adjudicated for the particular offense that they have been accused of. So I want people to clearly understand that. But the reality is this overall community policing bill, again, we, Montgomery County Police, are fully supported. We have been and we will be. We are working towards even improving our processes and reorganizing many parts of our police department and our divisions in order to better serve this community from a community engagement standpoint, and to even our Patrol Services Bureau, which is extremely busy. And I will tell you, I will say as the Chief of Police that I think we need more patrol officers, and that's for another discussion for another day. But when we talk about having the time to develop and to make sure that officers can do community engagement programs while they're on duty, during the 10-hour days, while they're also the first responder to any incident, whether it be a traffic collision, whether it be a family disturbance, or some theft from a store, whatever the case may be, they are the officers that have to respond to those. But we are working ways to try to develop time in their day. Every community we know is not the same. There are some urban communities that we serve. There are some suburban communities that we serve, and there are some rural communities that we serve. So to put a sort of put an officer in a box to say that you have to do community policing this way, that is not possible. Every district has different needs. There are different needs from those communities, And I think we have to adapt programs in order to best serve those communities in which those officers work. But what I do want to do is to provide those officers the ability and the time to be able to do that. And my staff and we have been working diligently and coming up with that plan. That plan will be better proposed to the council at a later time. But I will tell you that we will we'll aggressively be doing some things to enhance our community, and we'll be growing the community engagement division under Captain Pruitt in order to do some programs such as what I'm proposing to bring back, such as PAL, the Police Athletic League, as an example. So there are lots of things on our plate. We are committed to doing it, and I just wanted to thank you all for your support during this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. If I could ask the other people on the panel to identify themselves, please.
My name is Captain Sonia Pruitt. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the Montgomery County Police.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dinesh Patil, Acting Assistant Chief for the Management Services Bureau.
Good afternoon, Willie Parker Lone, Acting Assistant Chief, Patrol Services Bureau.
Thank you all. Is there anything else for this one? Yes, please. Absolutely, Captain.
If you could indulge me for just a second, because we talk about the SRO program, which is very near and dear to my heart. Not only are the SROs a part of the community engagement division in terms of us supervising and managing them in the schools, but I have worked with the SRO program since almost its inception as the Educational Facility Officers Program back in 2004 in various capacities. I appreciate your support of the SRO program. They are probably one of the most special group of police officers that I've ever worked with. I listened to their stories about their interaction with the children and the teens that they work with in the schools. They are an integral part of the school family, the parents, the administration, and the security. I had a meeting with some of the young ladies that are SROs who have a summer camp every year. It's not well publicized, but we're going to do something about that. They go and they find resources. They put out applications. The young people come to the camps. Their parents want to hang out too because they're having such a great time. And at the end of the camp, we have kids who really, their relationship with the police is kind of iffy. Now all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is new. We didn't know that there were police officers like this. We don't just go out and grab someone and just toss them into a school. They are vetted. They have to apply for that position. They have to come with a certain set of skills and a certain passion for young people. And then they have extensive training. I could go on and on, but I just want you to know, first of all, thank you for the support. And also that they are looking to the county and the council and hopefully the county executive and the people in the county to understand what they really, really do, and that they are really vested and they have passion for what it is that they do. And it's not just, I'm coming to work to arrest kids. It's coming to build relationships with a population that really needs our support as the police, and we need theirs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Captain. Is there anything else from this packet? Thank you all. I think you're staying, though, because we're next to see. Yeah, sure. Yeah, all right. Thank you. All right. The next item that we're going to have is capital improvement program, and it's for the police. And I think some of you are staying. I see several are staying here. And with that, Ms. Farag, if you could please lead us through.
Good afternoon, everybody. Susan Farag, council staff. This item is the capital improvement program for the police department. It shows approximately $43.6 million expenditures over the next 6 years. This is an increase of about $12.8 million from the approved FY17 through 24 CIP of $30.8 million. This increase stems primarily from the addition of a Public Safety Communications Center Phase 2, electrical distribution and HVAC upgrade project, as well as the addition of an outdoor firearms training center project, and it also reflects a slight delay of the Public Safety Training Academy academic building complex project into FY21 and FY22. The first item I'd like to speak about today is the 6th District Police Station.
Yep.
And I gave a lot of history in the packet, which I'm just going to go over very briefly, but I just wanted to put it all in one place for the record. This project was first introduced in the CIP in the FY01-06 CIP. At that time, design was programmed to begin in FY06, and this was to support a newly created 6th district within the police department. The project was delayed in the following CIP cycle, and it continued to be delayed. And finally, in FY13, the project was indefinitely deferred due to fiscal constraints. A lot of that is related to the recession. We had many projects that were delayed for significant amounts of times during that period. It was placed back into the recommended FY19-24 CIP, and it provided for the planning, design, and construction of a new 28,000 square foot police station. It was also supposed to have a 60,000 square foot parking garage that would serve Gaithersburg and Montgomery Village. When the last approved CIP had construction scheduled to begin in the fall of 2023 and to be completed in the winter of 2025. The recommended CIP maintains this timeline. At this point, the county must undergo a code compliance review just because the program of requirements is older. They just need to make sure that everything is still in compliance with current code. That's to be completed in FY21. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the current station, which is in leased space. I think it's the second leased space that they've had. And it's kind of in an office park type setting. It's not as big as it needs to be. It can't handle, particularly it can't handle community relations. It does have, I believe, one conference room, but they needed more flex space in order to be able to actively engage the community in different types of programming. It is currently, the lease for this leased space is for 7 years, and it ends coincidentally when construction is slated to end, which is December 31st, 2025. And this is giving me a little bit of concern. The landlord also has a right to terminate this lease with 18 months notice. And I don't like the fact that it's butting up against one another. If the construction is delayed, it might possibly require a new lease. And if the landlord does not want to renew, they might have to find different leased space. For that reason, I'm recommending that this project be moved up 1 year in the programming and the funding. But I did want to warn you, there is absolutely no capacity in the CIP at this point to really shuffle around a lot of funds. And that's something that'll have to be, that decision will have to be made at a later date. But I do want to put that out there for your consideration.
Thank you. I think you can actually ask Mr. Assant the history of this. You were the planning director of Gaithersburg, I believe, when the land was given for free. I was there as well, so you're certainly familiar with it. And I understand that we're very tight for CIP, but Greg, if there's any way that we can finally get this thing accomplished, I think it would be most helpful.
Thank you, Council President. For the record, Greg Austin. Good afternoon. I think the staff packet points out a lot of the pertinent information. Certainly, the existing lease that we've renewed a couple of times in a 7-year renewal is rather unique, and I think exhibits the landlord's intent to not have us as a tenant in perpetuity. And so the construction timeline and funding expenditure schedule is to reflect that. Now that the Watkins Mill interchange is up and running, development next door, there'll be a Royal Farms next door to this site, has caused us to create a sense of urgency to get the station finally in place. The executive obviously recognizes that and has included that in the CIP after previous CIPs having pushed that due to affordability. So with that, we're confident that we'll stick on the timeline. As Susan mentioned, we'll be dusting off the old design, making sure that it's up to code, any refreshing that it needs to have, and then we'll go to building permit and get this thing underway.
Okay. Any comments? I think, thank you. I think we're Gabe and I, the two of us on the committee, are in agreement that if we can push this forward, we would like to push it forward. We'll have to figure out how to do it.
Right, 1 year?
Yes.
2-0, okay. The next project is the Outdoor Firearms Training Center. That's, it was originally included in the CIP for the FY07-11 CIP. The outdoor firearms range now is located in Poolsville, and it's over 40 years old. It has had some minor improvements, but it has not been substantially renovated during that time. This is a project that again got delayed because of the recession, and finally all funding was taken out of the schedule for it. It's been placed back in this year, and the total project costs are $5 million. The new project calls for the expansion of the rifle range and enlarging the pistol range. The earthen protection berms on both sides and at the end of the rifle and pistol ranges will be increased and refurbished. The rifle range will be widened to create more lanes, and the pistol range will be lengthened from 25 to 75 yards. Most of the total project costs in this, not including the weapons cleaning area and explosive bunker, can be attributed to the site work and infrastructure costs, such as stormwater management. Additionally, the project calls for providing an open-air pavilion for weapons cleaning for about $65,000 and also providing a new explosive bunker for about $86,000. This facility is important for ongoing weapons training for the police department, and when it was originally designed, the 5-lane rifle range was built to meet the training needs of a much smaller SWAT team than what the department has today. And further, there are many patrol officers who are now carrying long guns in their patrol vehicles, and the training needs to be able to include multiple qualification training sessions per year, multiple patrol rifle classes per year, and unscheduled practices by individual officers. And I just wanted to point out that they would also be able to run certain types of training scenarios at this range after it's been changed that would allow for more reality-based mock scenario training, which is viewed as a best practice for the use of force incidents. Again, due to the increased needs for weapons training, the use of the range by other departments, including the sheriff, we're recommending that this project also be expedited by a year.
I'm fine with that. There again, we're going to have to figure out where we're getting this money, and if we have to
Right.
choose one or the other, what we're choosing. But I certainly would like to have both.
And this will go to council review as well, and we
Right.
can
Okay.
look at it again then.
You're okay with that too? It's a 2-0.
The 2-0. Okay, the next item is Public Safety Training Academy Academic Complex, building complex, and that's the one that's off of Great Seneca. This project was part of the county's Smart Growth Initiative. As you know, the Public Safety Training Academy itself has been relocated to Snoffer School Road, and this particular project here provides for the redevelopment of the old Public Safety Training Academy site. The project involves the demolition and environmental cleanup of the site, staff time to oversee those activities, and redevelopment of the site to support the Corridor City's transitway and proposed bikeways in the Shady Grove Master Plan area. The project remains in the CIP this year with funding scheduled just to manage the solicitation, negotiation, and sale of the property. It also reflects some site management and maintenance costs until the sale is complete, as well as any transactional and closing costs. And council staff's recommending approval as submitted.
You okay with that? 2-0.
And finally, we have the Public Safety Communication Center Phase 2, which deals with HVAC systems and electrical distribution, sorry. The history of this building, you know where it's located, and it's a 2-story office building that was built in 1981, and it had been leased space for a long time. It had had major renovations done in 2003 and additional renovations in 2013 and 2016. This building was purchased by the county 2 years ago, and that project provided for the replacement of the mission-critical HVAC systems in 2019. The remaining building HVAC systems are either original or 16 years old. The total project costs for this are almost $15 million. The project provides for the second phase of the building system improvements, and that includes generator plant replacement, redundant electrical distribution upgrade, condenser water distribution, rooftop units, and HVAC system heat pumps. Since portions of the generator plant replacement and the redundant electrical distribution upgrade supports 911 operations, they are eligible for expenses to be charged to the State Emergency Number System Board Trust Fund. The other systems are not eligible. The council staff is recommending this be approved as submitted, but would also like to get periodic reports from the police department and general services just on what's happening as this program goes through,
Okay.
just because of the critical nature of the systems involved.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
And Chief, I have a feeling you're not going to try to talk us out of doing any of these projects, but
I have no comment.
wise, very wise, Chief. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. That concludes this packet, and now we're going to go to the final packet of the day, which is corrections and rehabilitation. And Mr. Hassan gets to stay. And we'd like to welcome Director Angela Talley of DOCR and her team. Who's going to lead us through?
I'm sorry. The CIP for the Correction and Rehabilitation Department includes, or costs total $5.5 million in the 6-year CIP. While the funding remains level or relatively flat from the last approved CIP, this total includes a significant decrease due to the elimination of assumed state aid for the criminal justice complex, and it also reflects the completion of the pre-release center dietary facilities improvement project. Funding reductions are offset by the addition of a new Montgomery County Detention Center partial demolition and renovation project. There's a table on the next page that shows the expenditures by year. As you know, and this has a very long history too, there was an original MCDC replacement project that was placed in the CIP in 1997, I believe. And that kept changing, it kept getting deferred, it kept changing again until it finally changed into a version of the criminal justice complex. At the time that that project was renamed, it was actually just looked at a more efficient, larger physical space for corrections to do the same type of work that they were doing, but it would have a better workflow and systems available, and it would also be a brand new building, since the current building has had lots of difficulties and lots of need for repairs. I believe DGS at one time, and perhaps still does, had a staff person assigned specifically to that project, to make sure, to that building, to make sure that things were addressed as they had to be addressed. Then it underwent a different redesign when Director Green was here, where he looked at it as a two-part system. One part would have pre-booking diversion possibilities, including a sobering center for people who have had contact with police, but were either under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and it would just give them a time to sober up basically and get them connected to service, as well as it would have a mental health unit in the same vein to divert them away from being arrested and actually connect them to the services they need that brought them in contact with police in the first place. And then the other part was the typical central processing unit. That was, my understanding is the estimated cost for that was $120 million. And it would not have been completely eligible for a state aid match because not all of the pieces were correction-related pieces. And since that was much too unwieldy figure to deal with, the departments want to re-envision this and look at it better. They also think some parts of the pre-booking diversion programs might be better tweaked to fit emerging needs. We've got the mental health court now, which was not there when this was first envisioned, and we also have STEER, which was not there when this was first envisioned. And there's also some debate about whether or not the mental health issues should be addressed in some other part of the county, not necessarily within the criminal justice complex. So the executive's going to go back and look at that and look at current needs and talk to stakeholders such as hospitals and other providers and see what might be a better, more appropriate both building as well as services that might be run from there or from a different place in the county. Council staff's recommending approval as submitted by the county executive. However, I just wanted to note, in light of the county's recent commitment to racial equity in government decision-making and the recent legislation that has passed, council staff's recommending that a racial equity impact assessment requirement be added to the PDF, and I gave examples of what language might look like on page 4. And that's just something that they could report back to the council as this project moves forward.
Okay, I'm good with that. You're good. 2-0.
Okay. The second one, as I mentioned, is the MCDC partial demolition and renovation project. This building was built in 1961. Although there's a high-rise tower and other modular units were constructed a little bit later. The replacement for this building had been put in the CIP initially in FY97, but was closed out in FY11 when the criminal justice complex project was placed in. Over the past 10 years, significant stabilization efforts have been performed, including a new central processing unit. The new layout improved security and workflow while processing arrestees for intake, and it provided a new area for the district court commissioners and public defenders. It also improved layout and security with a new Sally port. It also included some new roofing renovations and other system stabilization. This current project has been placed back into the CIP since the CJC will be further delayed. and it includes a new project meant to renovate certain areas of the facility and afterward demolish vacant space, including the high-rise tower, 5 vacant modular units, and the CIU pod. Construction is scheduled to begin this summer. There are 5 phases because it's a very complex type of renovation and demolition because of the fact that you have individuals who are living there 24 hours a day and different security needs as well. Once the construction starts, all 5 phases are expected to be completed in about 18 months, and council staff's recommending approval as submitted.
Okay, good. We're 2-0 on that.
And that's it for today.
That's very good. Director, did you have anything to add?
No, sir. Good afternoon.
You taking a success as a win? Is that what you're doing?
Less is more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are adjourned.